tuned in to Radio Gold. As you no doubt recall from the first half of our story, John Steed and Emma Peel find themselves in the proverbial pickle, as this perfectly perplexing puzzle leads them further down the path to personal peril. Stay tuned for the conclusion of our dramatic tale with the Avengers.
Now, from the makers of Cold Water Omo,
John Steed made his way swiftly down the platform. The Liverpool train was ready to pull out. He kept the youthful figure of Edward Salt in clear view. What he didn't know was that a honeymoon couple were also about to board the train.
Hey, just a minute. Look there. That man. The one with the bowl and the umbrella.
What man?
The one ahead. It's the same man.
Who?
The same man who found Lucas's briefcase. The man that Bart went after.
Are you sure?
Positive.
Bart didn't report back, did he?
Missing. Believed dead. We'd better take a good look into this, hadn't we?
The Avengers. John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers.
Episode 4 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel are once more caught up in an intriguing train of events. John Steed and Emma Peel had found the body of Mark Lucas in a disused waiting room at Chase Halt. It was clear from duplicate nameplates that read Norborough that he'd been tricked into getting off the train and had been murdered. From a thorough investigation of Lucas's papers, John Steed had managed to learn that there was to be an assassination of a VIP. What the plan was, who were the killers, and even who was the chosen victim, was still a mystery. But suspicion had fallen on Edward Salt, personal secretary to Admiral Cartney, and Steed had arranged to have some false information passed on to the Admiralty. It looked as though Salt had taken the bait. Steed followed him to the Liverpool train, having made sure that Mrs. Peel was fully in the picture. Salt boarded the train, entered a compartment, placed his case on the rack, and settled down behind a newspaper. Out in the corridor, Steed stopped and raised the handle of his umbrella to his lips. He clicked a small switch. A piece of the handle flew open. Steed spoke softly into the mesh of a concealed microphone.
I haven't let Salt out of my sight, and so far he hasn't made any attempt to contact anyone, nor has anyone attempted to contact him. I'm going to join him in the compartment. The train's just about to leave. Chilly.
Very. Tickets, please. Have your tickets ready, please. All tickets, please. First stop, Dover. Tickets, please.
Evening.
Thank you. Yours, sir?
Here somewhere. Oh, yes, here we are.
Thank you.
There is a diner on the train, isn't there?
That's right, sir. 2 along the corridor.
Do you do the journey often?
Pretty often, yes.
Salt retired behind his newspaper. The 8:10 to Liverpool roared on into the night. When Salt went to dine in the restaurant car, so did Steed. He returned slightly ahead of Salt and sat deliberately in the wrong seat.
Oh, I say, would you mind if we changed seats? Mine was reserved. I find it makes me a bit sick if I have my back to the engine.
Oh, certainly, not at all.
As Steed moved to swap seats, he noticed the reserved note stuck above the seat.
Seat 4, compartment 7, carriage 67. 4767.
out in the corridor, the groom left the just-married compartment and sought out the ticket collector. Their conversation was brief and straight to the point.
I was just coming to look for you. That man seated in Salt's compartment. I think he's trouble. He was the man Bart went after.
Right. In that case, we'd better tip Salt off about it, hadn't we?
When Salt came out into the corridor to stretch his legs and have a smoke, the ticket collector drew him a little to one side. Minutes later, Salt entered the compartment again. Steed appeared to be dozing, leaning heavily on his umbrella. Upon opening his eyes, he found himself looking down the wrong end of a revolver.
Stay right where you are. Don't move. And don't speak.
But you'd better start that tape recorder in the umbrella going, hadn't you, Steed? On Norborough Station, Mrs. Peel, having driven down at top speed, paced the platform well wrapped up against the cold night air. In the train that was hurtling through the dark towards her, the bride and groom were talking.
Well, what's the news?
All taken care of, my love. All taken care of. Ah, Norborough.
Mrs. Peel hastily scanned the few passengers who alighted. No sign of John Steed. She moved swiftly up the platform, stepping back hurriedly when she recognized Salt, relaxing in his seat. She was about to move on when she noticed Steed's umbrella hanging from the rack. Salt left his seat and walked out into the corridor. Mrs. Peel nipped swiftly into the compartment and grabbed at the umbrella as it swung gently to and fro. Only just made it, Mrs. Peel. Later, in the just-married compartment, the bride and groom looked up as the door opened. The ticket collector entered.
Salt's just leaving next stop.
Good.
It isn't that message he brought us. Lies from beginning to end. Not a word of truth in it.
Sure.
Positive.
Oh, dear.
He'll be going back to his office sometime tonight.
In which case, I'd better be there to deal with him. Hadn't I?
Mrs. Peel headed for London and let herself into Steed's apartment.
Steed? Steed!
Forlorn hope, Mrs. Peel.
Now, why would Steed leave his umbrella? What did he say? An agent in trouble always leaves something behind as an identification. Let's see.
It didn't take Mrs. Peel long to find the secret in the handle.
Salt has just boarded the train. I haven't let Salt out of my sight, and so far he hasn't made contact with anyone, nor has anyone attempted to make contact with him. I'm going to join him in the compartment. The train's about to leave.
Stay right where you are. Don't move, and don't speak.
Mrs. Peel stared at the umbrella, then hurried to the phone. Within minutes, she was talking to Admiral Courtney.
Admiral, Mrs. Peel, sorry to disturb you.
Always pleased to get a call from a lady in the evening, but it's long after 8 bells, you know.
Look, I'm sorry, but I have to see you. It's very important and concerns a security leak. And your secretary, Edward Salt.
Salt, security? What the devil's it all about?
I'll tell you when we meet. Your office in half an hour, right?
Mrs. Peel wasn't the only one to visit the Admiralty that evening. The groom had beaten Salt back to town and was hiding behind the wall drapes, waiting his time. He didn't have long to wait. Salt entered the office swiftly and made for his own desk, switching on a small table lamp and pulling out drawers. The groom moved forward, fitting a silencer onto his gun. He was whistling quietly, rather appropriately, the wedding march.
What the You! What do you want? Why are you pointing that at me? What have I done?
I think you've forgotten who pays you. The signal you gave us, it was a fake. The HMS Pyrocanthus in mothballs has been for years. So the General Staff won't be visiting enemy installations, will they?
Well, I got it from the Admiral. You've got to believe me.
You could be right. You could be telling the truth.
Well, then?
In that case, it means that you are under suspicion. Sorry, Salt. It's too close to the big day. Can't take risks, old boy. Sorry.
The groom bent over Salt to make sure the work was complete. He was still humming the wedding march. With a smile, he took the white carnation from his buttonhole and dropped it on the body, and hurried out of the room by one door, as Mrs. Peel and the Admiral entered by another.
Mrs. Peel, you haven't explained
I
why...
will, given time, I promise. If we can just search his desk, I'm sure I can find something.
Hold on. A whiff of grape shot in the air.
The Admiral advanced to Salt's desk and found the body.
My dear girl, I do owe you the most sincere apology. There is something going on.
There was. Someone beaten us to it.
Mrs. Peel stooped and picked up the buttonhole.
Until death do us part. Oh, sorry, just thinking aloud.
Well, please don't. Not in that way. No. Those words send a cold shiver right through my timbers.
A sailor's fancy.
A sailor's fancy is fancy-free. I've spent my whole life avoiding the final splicing. Never dropped anchor in one port long enough to... didn't you say you want to search the place?
Admiral, is there any particular VIP about to travel anywhere at the moment?
There's always a VIP about to travel somewhere. Every waking minute of the day there's someone on the move. Why?
I was just thinking. Lucas was onto something. A VIP getting popped off.
Over my dead body?
Well, it could be. And what's this? London to Norborough, first-class return.
Oh, must be 100 of them. Man must have had an obsession about railways. Impertinence. Railways run on land. And to think that he used to sit in that office...
Look, Admiral, they're all punched. See? All punched neatly through the middle O in Norborough.
Blistering barnacles. I mean, the holes about the size...
Oh, that self-respecting microdot. Makes sense, doesn't it? Salt fills in the O with a microdot.
The ticket collector clips it out again.
And bingo, the message is passed on.
Passed on to a ticket collector.
The ticket collector on the Norborough run who takes tranquilizers for his stomach. Well, he's going to need them in future.
That's fighting talk, Mrs. Peel.
Avengers.
Listen every evening, Monday to Friday, to John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers, brought to you by the makers of Cold Water Omo.
Let's take a short intermission. Nero Wolfe made his larger-than-life radio show debut on July 5th, 1943. This intelligent detective show, based on the Rex Stout novels, proved to be a natural for classic radio. Throughout the show's run, Santos Ortega, Louis Van Rooten, Francis X. Bushman, and Sidney Greenstreet all filled the voluminous chair of Nero Wolfe. As well, a large assortment of actors played the part of every blonde's hero, Archie Goodwin. The Adventures of Nero Wolfe show remained popular on the airwaves in different versions for 8 years, from 1943 to 1951. Stay tuned. The penultimate episode starts in a few seconds.
Now, from the makers of Cold Water Omo...
Emma Peel stepped over the dead body of Edward Salt and searched his desk. The Admiral attempted to give a hand.
What's this? Railway tickets. London to Norborough, first-class return.
Well, must be hundreds of them. Man must have had an obsession about railways.
Look, Admiral, they're all punched.
Oh.
See? All neatly punched through the middle O in Norborough. The hole's about the size of a microdot. It makes sense. Salt fills in the O with a microdot.
And the ticket collector clips it out again.
And the message is passed on to the ticket collector. We've got it, Admiral. We've got it.
The Avengers. John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers.
Episode 5 of this story, in which John Steed is lost and found, and Mrs. Peel makes a determined effort to correct a disastrous train of events. Mrs. Peel had lost John Steed. In checking up on Edward Salt, she'd raced to Norborough Station to keep an appointment with Steed. He wasn't there, only his umbrella swinging gently from the luggage rack. Mrs. Peel had managed to collect it and listen to the message Steed had recorded upon the secret apparatus in the handle, but it hadn't told her very much. She'd turned for help to Admiral Cartney, and they'd found Salt's body. Now Mrs. Peel was sure she was on the right lines. Railway lines, which would take her to Chase Halt Station yet again. In the station was a train. The ticket collector opened a door. The man who was posing as a bridegroom climbed in.
How'd he go? Splendidly. Mr. Salt is no more, and I've brought you a little keepsake. A memento. It's Salt's mini-camera. Might be useful.
Good. Let's see how your worthy bride is getting along. Are you making progress?
Yes. Nearly finished.
The bride was working on the floor, installing a bomb under the corner window seat.
Just reassure me. How do we know that the vibration of the train won't set it off?
You'll have to take my word.
She has a good list of credits.
It's all very fine, but never anyone as important. What triggers the bomb off?
A radio signal.
Where will it come from?
From this train.
Sounds dangerous. There should be at least a mile between us. We don't want to blow ourselves up as well.
We won't. At the moment it goes up, we'll be speeding away in the opposite direction. Now relax. We all have our problems.
What's yours?
Well, for instance, how do we get this carriage off this train and onto his train?
Easy. There's your answer.
The ticket collector produced a series of very official stick labels. He showed them to the group. They all read,
"This carriage to be commandeered and prepared for VIP train."
Very important person.
Very.
I'll transfer this carriage tomorrow, and I'll attend to it personally. I'll be sorry to see it go.
Not to worry. You may be losing a carriage, but he is gaining a bomb.
Mrs. Peel arrived at the deserted Chase Halt Station carrying Steed's umbrella. She immediately went to the tool chest where they had found Mark Lucas's body and was relieved to find it empty. Far off along the platform could be heard the querulous voice of old Crew. He was singing to himself as he went about his self-inflicted duties.
When I marry your daughter...
Mrs. Peel dodged back into the shadows as she heard footsteps approaching. A man approached, hand in coat pocket, clearly clutching a gun.
Are you Mr. Crew?
Oh, yes.
You live here?
Oh, I've got a little place in my signal box. Semi-detached. Here, further along the line.
You live alone?
Hey, what are the questions? Who are you?
The man was about to withdraw his hand from his pocket when Mrs. Peel moved like lightning. She grabbed his wrist. It wasn't a gun at all. It was an identification card.
Mrs. Peel! Mrs. Peel!
I don't know you.
George Warren, I'm a friend of Steve's.
Oh, yes? Then where does he buy his trilbies?
He doesn't. He wears bowlers and buys them in St. James's. This is my identification card.
What are you doing here?
I could ask you the same thing.
Ah, but I thought of it first.
Special security watch all along this railway line.
Oh? Someone important travelling along it?
Perhaps you don't understand me, Mrs. Peel. Special security. Can't divulge details to anyone. And I mean anyone. Now then, what about you? What are you doing here?
I wanted Mr. Crewe's advice on a railway matter.
Oh, my experience is at your disposal, Mrs. Peel. But why don't we retire to my signal box, talk over a nice cup of tea?
Splendid.
Now, what exactly is your problem?
Well, it's this umbrella. I want you to listen to it.
In the just-married compartment of the train, the ticket collector faced the bride and groom.
A mini camera of sorts. There was a film in it.
A practical place to keep a film, I'd say.
I've just had it developed. It's detailed security on this line. They're sending a special branch man to visit every station along the route.
Well, so what?
Don't you see that means Chase Holt? They'll find Lucas's body.
And that means the game is up. Unless I can get to the special branch man first. When do we reach Chase Holt?
Coming up in about 10 minutes.
The groom grinned and reached beneath the seat, producing a Tommy gun.
Splendid. An unscheduled stop is indicated, don't you think?
In the signal box, drinking hot, sweet tea, Mrs. Peel demonstrated the mechanism of the tape recorder in the umbrella and said,
You see, in the background is the clatter of the train. Now, is it possible for you to pinpoint the exact section of a rail which made that noise?
Noise? Noise, madam? Poetry. Pure poetry. Another stanza, please.
Look here, Mrs. Peel. This may be all very interesting, but what does it all mean?
Steed's disappeared. This is the only lead I have. If I can find just where he was when he was held up, then it's a step in the right direction. Well, Mr. Crewe?
Let me hear it again.
Move and don't speak.
Oh, sounds all wrong. Yeah. There are 2 sets of diddly bombs. Oh, it's impossible. A train can't be going fast and slow at the same time.
He's right. Diddly bomb. Diddly bomb.
Yes.
You know, I don't think this part is a train at all. Just a minute. Diddly bomb. Diddly bomb. It's the Mark V tapping code, a sort of tricked Morse device so that man could communicate with each other in prisoner of war camps. Spool it back, Mrs. Peel. Give it to me again.
Right.
D-U-R-V-I-B-G-E. Durbridge. That must mean Durbridge Junction.
Oh, yes. Well, Durbridge Junction is on this line. 9 lines with close couple of points of Hampson design. The original lines laid down in 1899. Further modifications carried out on April 25th. Hey, that's funny. The train stopped at the station. Nothing ever stops here. There's something very wrong here. Must be something very wrong.
Back in the station, the train had stopped. The groom slipped out onto the platform. He headed for the tool chest and was amazed to see that it no longer contained a body.
The old boy in the signal box. It must be him. Right.
Holding the Tommy gun at the ready, the groom hurried up the line. In the signal box, Mrs. Peel was insisting that she should be told the complete truth.
Look, if someone important is travelling on this line, I have a right to know. Now, is it today?
Tonight.
But who is travelling tonight? I must...
Mrs. Peel had leapt at old Crewe, knocking him over into safety. But George Warren lay on the floor, dying. Mrs. Peel crawled over to him.
Who is it, Warren? Who's travelling this line tonight?
The Prime Minister.
Mrs. Peel and old Crewe only just managed to get to the train before it started to pull out. In the corridor, they paused to get their breath.
I still don't see why you had to pull me along.
You're my only ally, the only one I can trust.
Well, that's extremely kind of you, but...
Look, all the others are dead or missing.
My dear lady, I fear that my services would be to no avail at all.
You're getting a ride on a train, aren't you? How could you turn your back on that?
No, that is true, of course. Yes, this is a nice example of the 5//77 type carriage.
Yes, well, let's go into details later. We must find Steed. Come on. I'll start here. You follow the ticket collector.
Ticket collector? Then what?
Watch him. See what he does, where he goes. And come back and tell me. Off you go.
Crew did his best, but the ticket collector and the groom had retired beyond the restaurant car to the galley, which turned out to be more a chief operations room than anything else.
We'll keep this door locked from now on. Only those who give the correct signal are allowed in. Are you comfortable, Mr. Steed?
John Steed was handcuffed by one hand to a steel chair.
I have been worse. I thought you should witness the final phase. Thought it might amuse you. Oh, very decent of you. Yes, for me, really. A coup isn't a coup unless someone is there to see it, someone to impress.
I'm afraid I shan't be able to applaud with these handcuffs on. Still, I can shout, author, if that'll help.
The look in your eyes will be enough.
Apathy?
Agony. You see, I'm going to kill your Prime Minister.
Oh, but presumptuous. How do you know which way I voted?
I'm not considering your politics, merely your patriotism.
It's greatly exaggerated.
I think not. Our trains will pass at about 8:57, and then you will hear the Big Bang.
Avengers. Listen every evening, Monday to Friday, to John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers, brought to you by the makers of Cold Water Omo.
Let's take a short intermission. Radio Gold is pleased to present these collected rare recordings, 4 adventures of Conan the Cimmerian. Conan the Cimmerian, of course, also known as Conan the Barbarian, is a fictional sword and sorcery fantasy hero that originated as a character created by writer Robert E. Howard in 1932 via a series of fantasy stories published in Weird Tales magazine. Of course, this has been since adapted to books, comics, films, television programs, and, of course, radio shows. Well, you get the idea. A character iconic over time. Stay tuned for the exciting conclusion of our Avenger adventure.
Now, from the makers of Cold Water Omo.
This will be the reserve compartment, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, definitely. This will do. It has an air to it.
We thought perhaps the corner seat over there.
Yes, he likes to face the engine. Nice view. Push-button service. Excellent. The whole carriage is splendid. He may want to thank you personally. You'll be on the train, I suppose.
I'm afraid not, Mr. Secretary. We're on our usual run in the other direction.
We shall be passing each other then.
So we will. At 8:57, precisely.
The Avengers. John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers.
Episode 6, the final episode of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel prevent disaster striking again and put a stop to a diabolical train of events. Mrs. Peel, searching for the missing John Steed, had called a chase halt to enlist the help of old Crew, the self-appointed owner of the station. They hadn't got a lot further forward, and another special security man, George Warren, had been killed. But the train from Norborough had made an unscheduled stop at Chase Halt, and Mrs. Peel had bundled old Crew aboard. They'd begun a systematic search of the train, hoping to find Steed. But Steed was held captive in the galley, firmly handcuffed to a steel chair. The ticket collector, who turned out to be the arch-villain of the piece, was explaining to Steed how he intended to kill the Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Steed, 8:57. At that time, we'll be running through Durbridge Station. Durbridge, population 2,413. A principal industry, manufacture of glass eyes for teddy bears. Fame? Non-existent. But after tonight, there won't be a person in the civilized world who hasn't heard of it. After tonight. After I've pressed this button at 8:57.
The ticket collector's hand hovered over the button.
A bomb, Mr. Steed. Your Prime Minister is sitting on a bomb.
Activate it from this train. You press the button as the trains pass.
At top speed. We shall be a mile away by the time it explodes. The end of a hard road, a long road. 21,214 miles to be exact. Shuttling back and forth.
Mobile headquarters. Ingenious. Defies detection. Nice way to make contact as well.
Our agents merely board a train. What could be more innocent?
Very ingenious.
Just another few miles, Mr. Steed. That's all.
Old Crew, out in the corridor, had been trying to find the ticket collector. He followed an attendant who approached the restaurant car and gave a knock that was obviously a signal. Old Crew advanced, tried the handle of the door. It was locked. Crew thought he'd better find Mrs. Peel and report, whilst inside the restaurant car, the attendant walked through to the galley.
It could be trouble, sir.
What do you mean, trouble? We're almost there.
It's the woman who lost £5, sir.
What about her?
She's on the train, in compartment 4767.
Oh, I see. A friend of yours, Steed?
Yes, very good friend, actually.
Well, we must take care of her. The bride is still on the train, isn't she, Groom?
Next compartment.
Splendid. I'll talk to her.
The collector turned to some rather complicated mechanism that stood on a table near the bomb button, fiddled with it, and spoke into a small microphone. The bride, in her compartment, heard an urgent whisper from the air vent above her head.
We have an enemy in the next compartment. The woman who is always prying upon us. See to it. Kill her now.
The bride seemed to show no surprise at all. She merely got up, took an automatic from her handbag, and slipped into the corridor. Mrs. Peel appeared to be dozing when the door of her compartment slid open.
Oh, so it's you. It'll be a pleasure.
The bride levelled the gun. Mrs. Peel swung an elegant leg and kicked the gun out of her hand. As though with a continuation of the same movement, Mrs. Peel launched herself across the compartment, butting the bride squarely in the midriff with her head. Thoroughly winded, the bride collapsed. Mrs. Peel grabbed her and threw her into the corridor.
You'd have done better to have stayed in your do not disturb compartment. I think if we tuck you under the seat, you might stay out of trouble.
In the operations galley of the train, the ticket collector had heard the sounds of the attack and realized that the bride had got the worst of it. John Steed grinned.
Hooray! Bravo! Oh, sorry. My patriotism got the better of me. I do apologize.
Groom, you better go and deal with things.
Be a pleasure. Nothing but a pleasure.
The groom left the galley, pausing only to pick up what looked like an innocent tray of tea things. Meanwhile, old Crew had found Mrs. Peel storing the bride under a seat.
Mrs. Peel, there are rules about these things, you know.
Well, I'm just keeping British Railways tidy.
Yeah, but what happened?
We had a difference of opinion. We didn't agree.
What about?
Well, whether she should shoot me or not. How are you, Crew?
Oh, Mrs. Peel. Bum, diddy, bum, 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 bum.
I like it. It's catchy. I can't see it making the top 10.
No, you don't understand. The door to the restaurant, the one that leads through to the galley, it's locked, but there's a special knock to get in.
Don't tell me, let me guess. Boom diddy boom boom?
Boom boom.
Right, stay here. Keep an eye on the bride and leave this to me.
Mrs. Peel made it to the restaurant car in double-quick time. She approached the door.
Boom diddy boom boom, boom boom.
Tea?
The groom stood in the doorway. He held a tray in one hand, the teapot on the tray with the other. The spout of the teapot pointed straight at Mrs. Peel.
A teapot gun. Dinky little things, really, isn't it? Very effective for hold-ups in cafes, trains, things where orthodox guns are a bit obvious. Do back up, dear lady. I'm afraid you've been the teeniest bit too inquisitive.
Shouldn't you be at a wedding or something?
Oh, that's just a disguise, a cover. They call me the groom. A session with me and people forever hold their peace, so to speak.
Fascinating.
I have a compulsive death wish. Other people's.
Really?
Mrs. Peel made a sudden movement backwards. The bullet from the teapot gun missed Mrs. Peel by a fraction of an inch. It shattered the glass of the window behind her.
Vandalism.
But it should show you that I mean business. Open the door.
The door?
Yes, that one, the outside one. Much nicer if your death looks like an accident, an unfortunate fall. Funny, really, being cast as the groom when at heart I'm really an undertaker. Now, let's get this over with.
Mrs. Peel appeared considerably affected. She swayed as though about to faint.
Oh, dear, the weaker sex.
What?
Mrs. Peel delivered a beautiful uppercut. The teapot gun flew out of the open doorway. The tray crashed to the floor. Mrs. Peel waded in. The groom grabbed and, through the struggle, attempted to push Mrs. Peel through the door. She replied by bringing her knee up viciously. The groom doubled up, tried to regain his balance by reaching for the door. He missed, tottered on the brink, and fell out of the carriage into the night.
Best man, I think.
Mrs. Peel reached out and grabbed the door, pulling it closed.
Oh, Mrs. Peel, don't you know it's extremely dangerous to lean out of a train while it's in motion?
We're not quite finished with danger. The restaurant car.
They made their way to the restaurant car. The door had been left open. The train roared on into the night.
Do you happen to have the right time, Mr. Steed?
I make it 8:55.
Another couple of minutes and the two trains will pass. We're running right on time. Splendid.
The collector removed the cover from the bomb button. His fingers tapped on the table. He could hardly keep from pressing the button prematurely. Mrs. Peel, moving through the restaurant car to the galley, found herself facing one of the attendants. She said,
"Evening?"
and hit him.
Watch out, Steed! The other one's got a gun!
Kill them!
Steed gripped the steel chair with his handcuffed hand and swung it at the other attendant.
The train! The train! It's coming!
The button, Emma, the button, the bomb!
Emma Peel sprang forward, grabbed a wire mesh in tray and inverted it over the button. The ticket collector thrust a finger through the mesh, trying to press the button.
Oh, no!
It's now! Now! The time is now! Oh, no!
John Steed got an arm round the ticket collector's throat and pulled him steadily away from the control panel. The other train roared by and vanished into the night.
It's over. The danger's past.
The ticket collector collapsed in a heap. And at that point, Old Crew entered.
The communication cord! Pull the communication cord! Yeah! Oh!
Old Crew pulled that communication cord. About 10 yards of the stuff came away in his hand.
Oh, modern trains! They don't build them like they used to. Disgusting, I call it disgusting.
A full supper at my place, Mrs. Peel.
Delightful, Steed. Plenty of traffic on the road.
Yes, people should drive more carefully in this wet weather. There you are, you see. I mean, look at that idiot.
We could park the car over there at the railway siding. And look what that poster says. Huh? It's safer by rail.
Avengers.
Listen every evening, Monday to Friday, to John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers, brought to you by the makers of Cold Water Omo.
Radio Gold is a 3 Nines Fine radio production. See you next time.